All good? Yeah, okay. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm quite honored to have so many people here to listen. My name is Margeaux. I'm the assistant curator here. So I'll just tell you briefly about myself. So I clearly am not from here, if you can tell an American accent from the speaker. I'm from the state of Ohio. From Cleveland, Ohio. So before working here, I worked at Holden Forest and Gardens, which is a botanic garden and arboretum in Northeast Ohio. I was a plant recorder for that institution for 3 years. And then I took on this role 3 years ago as assistant curator. So at this garden, I wear a lot of hats, but my main role is to keep the documentation on the collection. And so any given plant or plant grouping in our garden is going to have records associated with it. It's there to tell the story of where it came from, how we received it, where we received any given plant from, what it is, and also tell about its life at the garden, so how it's doing, how tall it grows, when it blooms, what color its flowers are. All of that information is captured in our plant records database, and that underpins any botanic garden, really. So I'm fortunate enough to work at this garden where we have an incredibly diverse collection and help keep the records on that. I also facilitate any researchers using our collection for their research, whether that's here or that's in South Korea. We try to facilitate any researchers. And also, most recently, I've been organizing and leading expeditions for the garden. So that's what we'll talk about today. I'll give you kind of a snapshot of what we're doing and why. So just a bit of a run through of what I'll talk about today. So I'll talk about why we go on expeditions, kind of what the mindset and the strategy is behind expeditions, where we're going, and then I'll talk about a day in the life. I'm using Kyrgyzstan as kind of my best example because that's one of the more rigorous expeditions we do, and I've led 3 expeditions there in the last 2 years. And then I'll talk about the process of bringing them back, what that looks like, and how we eventually get them as plants growing in the garden. And then I'll talk a little bit about what's next for the garden. I'm hoping to keep it to 30 minutes. I promise I won't take much more of your time. But yeah, so we'll jump right in. So a question you might have is why wild collect? It's an incredibly resource intense practice, right? We go all the way to another country or even in this country. We spend a lot of time and money and expertise setting up these wild collecting trips. And the question you might answer or ask, which is a valid question, is why would we go through all this trouble for wild collected plants in our collection? And the answer lies in a bit of a digression, but I'll talk to you about how most botanic gardens how most botanic gardens define the provenance of plants, where plants come from in their collection. So there's generally speaking 4 categories that we define our plants in. So you have unknown origin, which means we don't know where it came from, whether that's because it predates your records keeping system or it lost its label sometime in its life at the garden, or maybe records just weren't kept well at the time that it came in. So we just don't have any provenance information. We can't tell the story of where that plant came from. And we do have plants in the garden with unknown provenance. Then there's garden provenance, which means it's of cultivated origin. So either, we went to Scottsdale's and bought from a nursery like that, or another commercial nursery, or perhaps another botanic garden, or another, like a plant, national plant collection holder, something like that, where it's of cultivated origin and maybe you can't trace its lineage back to the wild. And then you have wild origin, which means that we can trace the origin back to the wild, right? So we might be able to say the GPS coordinates exactly where the population was that we collected this plant material, and whether that was as seed or cuttings or as whole plants. That'll be explained in your plant records. And so with wild, you can kind of start to tell this rich history of the plants in your collection and perhaps analyze your collection based on that information. The 4th category is Z or Z, and that is indirect wild origin. So you have your wild origin plants, and then say this tree here was wild collected, and then we decided to collect seed off of that tree and grow it out, then that progeny would be of indirect wild origin, because we can still trace its lineage back to the wild, but it's not directly from the wild, if you get me. So those are the 4 categories. And as you might kind of already assume from just the descriptions, wild has your most robust amount of information and kind of the most robust amount of things that you can do with that information, right? Because a lot is captured with that. So that's kind of the why. And so if you're keen on wild collecting, as we are, so we set out this living collection strategy, which was published in 2019, which set out our goals for the next 10 years. And in that, one of the most kind of quoted goal for us is to move our collection from a 20% wild collected, 20% of the accessions we hold in the collection are wild collected, and we want to move that to 40%. And so it's ambitious, but it's doable. And so the question becomes, well, where do you go? Because in a mild climate like the UK, you can grow plants from literally all over the world. So this map here that I generated is pulled from our plant records database. And I pulled all the plants in our collection, which is about 1,200 accessions of plants or plant groupings. And when I say accession, it's just like an individual, it could be a group of plants or one plant, but they come in as the same species at the same time from the same source and the same kind of propagule. So if it's all seed from the same source, then that's one accession, right? So I pulled out all of the accessions that we have that have GPS coordinates, and I mapped them. And this is what you get. And as you can tell, you get points all over the world, because that's the beauty of growing plants in the UK, is you can grow plants from all over the world. And that's how we have such a diverse collection here, about 8,000 different species and cultivars in our collection. And so you can get a bit overwhelmed from something like this, right? You can say, well, like, where should we go if we can grow plants from all over? And so some of the areas that we highlighted in our living collection strategy are these 4 areas. And we highlighted these 4 areas, which I'll specifically define shortly, because they're temperate hotspots, meaning that they're temperate climates and they have a high level of plant diversity. And so the first one here is the Balkans, Central Asia with a focus on Kyrgyzstan, South Africa, specifically the Cape, and temperate South America. And so those are the 4 areas that we kind of highlighted to be well climate matched, to be biodiverse, and to have partners that we're interested in making collaboration with. So we haven't yet established a relationship in temperate South America, but we're working on one with a botanic garden in Chile. But we have established really robust relationships with the University of Zagreb in Croatia, and we've led 2 expeditions there in the past year. In Kyrgyzstan, we've worked with the National Academy of Sciences and Greve Botanic Garden, and we've led 3 expeditions there. And then in South Africa, we've partnered with Stellenbosch Botanic Garden, which is an incredible botanic garden that's doing really cool conservation work in the Cape. So we've partnered with institutions in each of these areas, and we've started doing collecting. So you could tell from kind of the cluster of dots that represents the work we've been doing the last few years. So I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to talk to you about our expedition to Kyrgyzstan specifically. In July 2024, we went for the month of July, but we also went in May 2023 for a scouting expedition, and in August 2023 for a seed collecting expedition. So when we went to Kyrgyzstan, we went and at the end of the trip, we had 209 unique collections of 169 taxa. And when I use the word taxa, I mean taxonomic unit. So that's either a species or a subspecies, or maybe if we weren't able to identify something to a species level, it's at the genus level or perhaps even family level. So 169 different taxa. It's almost synonymous with species, but I'll use that word a lot. So just to flag that. It was myself and Nadia from our curation team, and Simon, who is our lead propagator and alpine expert. And we partnered with the Kyrgyz National Academy of Sciences, Greve Botanic Garden, which is the sole botanic garden in Kyrgyzstan. And then we had members of staff from Missouri Botanic Garden in the States and Kew join us as well. And so it was a really, heavily collaborative partnership. And if you don't know Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyzstan is a stunning country. It's in Central Asia. It's 1.5 times the size of the UK and a population of around 6 to 7 million people. And it's one of the most mountainous countries in the world, as you can kind of probably tell from most of these photos. I think it's the third most mountainous country in the world by area. So it's an incredibly diverse landscape, and it's really dominated by mountainscape. And so here is, here is the country. It's kind of hard to see, but this like this purple line is your country outline. So it's kind of like a little claw. And the pink dots are all the places we collected in July 2024. So we started up in Bishkek, which is the capital city, and then we went down into the Osh region. We did some collecting down here, and then into the stretches of the Batken region, and then came back around to the Chui region and back up to Bishkek. So it was quite a lengthy expedition, and I'll kind of get into what happens on expedition now. We'll get into the meat of things, yeah? So first of all, there's a lot of stuff when it comes to expedition. So expeditions in earnest, so to plan a July 2024 expedition, we started planning in earnest in December 2023. So it's a lot of logistical work, right? So you're coordinating with partners, what are we interested in collecting? When should we go? We determined July as a good time for collecting spring bulb material, so the seed of spring bulbs like tulips and iris and things like that. So we set out our targets in terms of species, kind of mapped out the regions we were interested in going, coordinated that with our partners in country, and worked hard to get all the supplies we needed, from med kits to just plastic bags, paper bags, sieves for cleaning seed, all of that stuff, and keeping in mind that we're going to be traveling the country in cars, so we are limited on space. So most of this stuff, like these are personal bags, like this one's mine, but this is all supplies for the expedition. So it's quite a lot of stuff, and it's just keeping control of that. We also did wilderness medical training because we would be in such remote areas, just to prepare ourselves in the event of emergencies. So an incredible amount of planning goes into these expeditions, especially something as challenging in some ways as Kyrgyzstan can be. And then once you're in country, you spend a day. You spend a day kind of getting situated in the capital city, and then you're off, right? So we drove about 3,000 kilometers in total over the month of July, and it's a lot of driving on roads with no names, and in environments like this. And so you're driving to your collecting expedition location, and then once you get there, it is absolutely a team effort. So everybody is involved, and everybody is working to first identify what we're interested in collecting. So remember that for the most part, you're not looking for flowers at this time of year, so you don't have that as an identification feature, right? You're looking for seed pods, which can be a lot more challenging because you know what a tulip looks like perhaps, but do you know what like the seed pod of a tulip looks like, right? So it's a new level of kind of identification. But once we identify our target species, we make sure that it's ethical to collect. So we abide by the CPC rules of, you don't collect more than 20% of the available seed of any population, and you don't collect more than 10% of an individual's given seed. So that allows for it to procreate for that year. So once we've identified a population that we're interested in collecting, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to do the collecting. And that's because you only get the one go, right? That's all you get. You're not going to come back to this location anytime soon, most likely. So you want to capture as much information and as much of the, that's relevant that you can. And so what that looks like is this data, right? So when we're doing collecting, we divide up our jobs. So we say, right, you're doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. Everybody's communicating and saying, are you done with your job yet? And we say yes or no, and then you continue. The first thing you collect is you try to identify it, right? Maybe you can identify it to the species, or maybe you're just saying, I know it's a tulip, right? I can tell you that much. So you're naming it to your best ability. This is where our in-country partners are absolutely crucial because their knowledge of the flora is much more robust. And so we rely on that knowledge a lot. We take photos of the landscape, but also of morphological details that will be useful in identification. And then we capture locality data. So that's in kind of a text format. So you could say, it's on the side of this highway, however many approximate kilometers outside of this village. You could say something like that, but we also take GPS exact coordinates. So you can return to that exact population if need be. We capture the altitude and the slope. So if you're on a steep slope, you might say I'm on a 45-degree slope. If you're on flat ground, you'd say flat ground. And then the aspect. So I'm on a north-facing, 45-degree slope. And all of that information is useful to understand for horticultural reasons, right? If I'm bringing the seed back and expecting it to grow here, I want to know where's best to grow it, right? If I'm in a north-facing something in the wild, then maybe I want to plant this in a place that doesn't get direct sun all the time, right? So you want to be using this information down the road. You collect ecological data, so you give a broad understanding of the habitat. Are you in a forest? Are you in an alpine meadow? Are you in a rocky scree? What is like the general habitat? Associated taxa, so you're running around and you're looking at everybody else who's there and you're understanding the community dynamics. So you are looking and trying to identify as best you can the other species that are present. Population size, how many individuals roughly are in this? Is it a population of approximately 10,000 or is it approximately 2? So giving that information, and then how many are you sampling from? Best practice to get the most genetic diversity from a population is about 50 natural lines. So 50 mother plants to collect from is your gold standard, but more than that is obviously good too, and that's for genetic diversity. We capture soil data too. So just again, so you understand the growing conditions of that plant. Descriptive information that might not be obvious through the photos. So the height of the plant, the diameter at breast height if it's a tree, what's its habit, is it weeping, is it prostrate, any of that information, and any relevant descriptors that won't come up in an herbarium sample, like your fragrances or your flower colors, they might not come out in your pictures or whatever. Any other ethnobotanical information, so if it's a relative of a crop that's domesticated, like we collected from some wild apple relatives, any pharmacological uses, local uses, or herbarium vouchers. So you can imagine why it takes 10 to 15 minutes per collection. But again, you don't have a second chance, and you want to get as much information as you can while you're there. And so everybody's working on getting this, and then of course collecting the seed as well. So you're doing all that during the day, and this is kind of what that looks like. So here's Nadia doing some soil sampling. Here's an example of my notebooks, and I can pass some around for y'all so you can just have a look at what that looks like. So yeah, you take your notes. You can see Andrea here, her little pouch is stuffed with all her recording information. You do your recording, you move on to the next one. You do that all day. Maybe, you definitely stop for lunch. And then in the evening, when you're out of sunlight, we might have a nice guest house to stay in, and then you're into your second job of the day, which is seed processing. So you process seed for a couple different reasons, but mainly you want to dry them out, because if a seed stays moist, it'll most likely mold, and then it's no longer viable. If seed's in like fleshy fruit, particularly, it'll start to it'll mold quicker, and then your seed again becomes not viable. Also, for the sake of space, with the fruit, seed can be quite bulky, and then it gets like shrunken down. Think of like an apple versus its seeds. So we want to get it down because we only have so much car space, and we have to minimize our impact. So we're keeping everything organized. We're keeping everything labeled with its collection number, and we're working as a team, sometimes late into the night, to just clean the seed. And if you don't have a house to stay in, that looks like head torches and a nice setting of a tent. And here's Nadia working on herbarium specimens. If you don't know what an herbarium specimen is, that's like we also take like an actual cut of the plant. And you can use that for DNA sampling later, or you can use that for identification purposes. And I put some examples, not from the trips, but of ones I've collected in the garden up here if you want to look later. But this is what like a final product looks like. So you have your label down here with your descriptive information. All of that collecting information would be down here. And then the plant itself, yeah. And that will go into our herbarium when it's nice and ready. Sleeping conditions vary. So we rarely stay in more than one place at a time. So we might be lucky enough to have a bed-like situation such as this, but most of the time we were wild camping. And oftentimes you get to your campsite at night and you're only aware of your setting once it's daytime. So we were very fortunate to be in some really beautiful places. Let's see what's next. Yeah, and collecting can be extremely stunning. In these pictures, on the right there, we were looking for a peony tenuifolia. And these are all like goat tracks mostly. So there's a lot of grazing that goes on in that country. So sometimes you're too late and the goats have already gotten what you're looking for. But sometimes like this area was not really well grazed, and we found some really diverse communities here, like a rare salvia and some alliums or onion relatives. So some really beautiful diversity there. Lunch will look sometimes at restaurants, but mainly we set up our own lunch and had a lot of pot noodles, but also tea and bread, and it was watermelon season when we were there, so a lot of watermelon. And you eat where you do, and it's a lovely little family you make. But sometimes you're really fortunate and you get to eat either in a restaurant or the hospitality there is absolutely splendid. And so people would host us and put out these unbelievable spreads of fruits and breads and various things. And you would just, you'd be very well fed, never went hungry. This was, we were making manti, which is like a dumpling type dish. So those get like folded and steamed. And then this is lagman. So when you went to restaurants, there was typically about 5 options on the menu. As a vegetarian, a lot fewer. So I ate this probably 5 times a week. It's like a chow mein dish, but it was really delicious. So let's pivot again and talk about some of the plants we collected. So like I said, Kyrgyzstan is incredibly diverse. It has about 4,000 different species that are known to grow there. And that compared to the UK, which I think has like 1,200 or somewhere in the 1,000 range. So it's really diverse, and you have some beautiful herbaceous perennials like this hollyhock here. We were able to collect off. This is like a real chunky allium, which is a very challenging to press, but a really lovely specimen. And then aconitum or monk's hood, I think its common name is, which can be very toxic, so you have to handle it with gloves. But we were fortunate to find some of that in seed as well. Some really cool things in the aster family. So this echinops, the heads were like this big. There's some echinops species or cultivars that grow here, but this one was really particularly stunning. And then this aryngium here was, with just the hue of blue was to die for, I'll tell you. Some oddities. So you have this member of the pea family here, this chesnia, which was growing prostrate just on the banks of a large lake there. And really just a cute little runner thing. And then here you see Georgi holding a ferula, and they're monocarpic, which means that once that individual blooms and then fruits, it'll die. So that one had done its business and was hoping for its next generation. But you can see, Georgi's not a short individual. He's holding it up a bit, but they're just growing all over the hillside, and really, really a wacky thing. Some trees and shrubs, so plenty of birch, but this is Betula tianshanica, so a different species than the river birch that we're familiar with here. Some really cool junipers. So this is like a prostrate one that grows mostly alpine. And so it forms these huge mats that from a distance just looks like big green blotches on the side of the hillside. It's really stunning. And you can tell, like, Andrea is about my size or my height, and they don't grow much higher than that. And then this is Melis neodzvetskiana, which is a rare apple that grows in Kyrgyzstan. And what makes it, how you characterize it is it's got a lot of anthocyanins or red pigments in it. And as you can tell from the seed cleaning process we have going on here, it's got red flesh, but also, or sorry, red skin, but also red flesh. So when you bite into it, it's red inside as well. And so we were fortunate to be there in right time. That was in August of 2023 when we collected those. And some cool shrubs. So we have clematis here, which you probably know as a vining plant, but this was a shrubby one. So it grew in a nice shrubby mass. And then some Capra spinosa, which is where you get caper berries from the flower bud. And of course, tulips. So the center of diversity for tulips is in Central Asia. There's something like 90 species, depending on the authority you agree with, of tulips in the world. About 26 of those grow in Kyrgyzstan alone. And so when we were there in May, when these pictures were taken, we were there in tulip season, and it was absolutely stunning to see wild tulips growing in their habitat. You see this Kaufmanniana, it has a yellow and a red form. This one, Tulipa dubia, is like an alpine grower, so it doesn't grow much taller than this, and it's got these really funky leaves, as you can see, that probably channel water towards it. If you can see, it kind of makes like a funnel. And then this Tulipa tacticulica is a newly named tulip that was named in partnership between the National Academy of Kyrgyzstan, National Academy of Sciences, and Cambridge. So the curator here, his previous PhD student, Brett Wilson, he helped to name this new species of tulip, and it's an absolute stunner, and it's got a vanilla fragrance. It's really lovely. So yeah, Central Asia is the center of diversity, and then the species are it started there is what it thought, like evolutionary speaking, and then it kind of radiated towards the Mediterranean. So you have some species in the Mediterranean as well. They don't come from the Netherlands. They were bred there and popularized in the Netherlands, but there's no tulip species that are native to the Netherlands. And this is what Tulip Kaufmanniana looks like about 3 months later when it's in seed, when we're collecting. So bringing it home, I'll try to speed up. I think I have about not that much time left. Basically, it's a lot of processing when we're back in Bishkek. We share all of the seed we collect with Garif Botanic Garden and leave portions of everything there. And we're responsible for getting phytosanitary from the government to check our seed and make sure everything's without pest or disease. This is me changing the newspapers on our herbarium specimens so they don't get moldy. It looks like it would take 30 minutes. It takes like 3 hours, and it's an incredibly tedious task. It must be done. Once we bring them back, there's a bit more cleaning to do, processing all that data and pushing it into our database, and then drying the seed down to a relative humidity of about 15% so that it stays viable over time, storing it in sealed glass jars with its new accession number. So you can see the first 4 digits tell you it was collected in 2023. The last 4 tell you it was the 1,782nd collection of that year. That's like for the whole garden, not just in Kyrgyzstan. And then you put them in our fridge at about 5 degrees Fahrenheit in our seed bank. Then we tell horticulture, we say, hey, we got all this new seed, come get it, come through. And so they make orders with the prop team. The prop team does an amazing job to keep everything organized and then research everything, what kind of propagation it needs to break its dormancy. They do that research, and then eventually you get this after a few months, right? So you sow your seed, and then this is a shot from our nursery where all of the Kyrgyz plants are growing happily. And then eventually you get something special like this. So on my left, on the right here, is the Achillea, so yarrow, growing out in Kyrgyzstan where we collected it. And here it is growing out in the scented garden at Cambridge. And this was dang near a year later on the nose when it finally got into the garden. So it can take an incredible amount of time to get things from seed to plants. Something like a tulip or like a bulbous plant can take 7 years to go from a seed to a flowering individual. So it's an incredibly patient game to play. Things like trees and shrubs too can take quite some time. So there's a lot of waiting that goes on, but some things like this Achillea will germinate and become a flowering plant quite quickly, which is a year. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what those that expedition or those expeditions would look like. So what's next for the garden is we've hired an expedition botanist. So his name is Matthew Jeffrey. He comes to us from Millennium Seed Bank at Kew. He's an incredibly talented individual and a real pleasure to work with. And he'll be kind of taking over, organizing the expeditions and really growing our relationships. And it's important that somebody's job is that, because the relationships are the most important part of the expeditions, and there's a lot of back and forth. That's important to maintain. And then there's, of course, refining focus. So of course we have our temperate hotspots, but we can continue to improve on what we select and what's best climate match, and ask those type of questions of our expeditions. That's it. I think I only went a few minutes over, so I apologize, but thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any.